Sup guys, this is the Booty Warrior, and today we're going to be discussing the Dead Space Remake. I've been playing this game for the past couple days, actually just finished it not too long ago, and I wanted to get some of my thoughts out there while the game is still fresh in my mind. Now this video will contain spoilers for the game as well as its sequels, you've been warned. Also I will be reviewing the PC version specifically, as I've experienced it on hard difficulty. First of all, talking very broadly about the remake, is it worth it? Yes. It's an incredible game, and even if you haven't played the original, it's a pretty good alternative to it. It maintains a lot of what made the first game special, from its addicting core combat loop to its strong atmosphere. If you like Dead Space 1 and 2, you will love the remake. If I was to compare the two, I'd say they're both about even in terms of quality for the most part, aside from a few things being worse, which I will get into more later. Although, if you are looking for a more unique experience here, you might be a tad let down, because honestly there isn't that much new content here. You go to a lot of the same places, to achieve a lot of the same objectives, to fight a lot of the same monsters. The context for why you go to these places, the interactions between certain characters is a little different. Some specific rooms and locations have a different layout, some puzzles are changed, and the game does subvert your expectations for specific enemy encounters, but overall, this would probably appeal more to people that are new to the franchise, rather than veteran players. But like I said, a lot of what made Dead Space great is here, and there's a tiny bit of new stuff to enjoy, and if you want an excuse to experience Dead Space 1 again, you get it here, with a fresh coat of paint and absolutely stunning visual effects, alongside top-notch sound design, which includes not just old monster sound effects, but a few new ones as well. The Ishimura is a lot darker this time around. Of course, the models and environments have more detail in them too. The game is full of so many effects that makes the impacted guns all the more satisfying to use. The flamethrower realistically burns away enemies and makes them charred black. The force gun is one of the coolest guns in the game, because not only does it knock back enemies, on top of dealing a shitload of damage, but it rips off their skin as well, which is an awesome effect. The added effect of tearing through bone as you shoot enemies doesn't just make your weapons feel stronger, but it's also a nice subtle visual indicator of how much of the enemy's health you're working down. All of the old weapons have been reworked, and are much more powerful than they were before. If you've ever felt underwhelmed by weapons like the force gun or the flamethrower, you'll be happy to hear that they're a lot stronger this time around. As its alt-fire, the flamethrower can create a wall of flame that damages enemies as they touch it, and staggers them for several seconds. The force gun can even create a gravity well that sucks enemies into itself to keep them out of the fight and deal damage over time. The pulse rifle has more utility than it did before. As much as I love the old alt-fire on it just for looking cool, it really wasn't all that practical in fights. And in this version they gave it a proximity mine that explodes on impact instead, somewhat similar to the alt-fire the pulse rifle in Dead Space 2. For the plasma cutter, it can apply damage over time when you upgrade it, and you can make its ammo capacity insanely high, having upwards of over 20 shots in one magazine before you have to reload. You might even say the weapons can be pretty overpowered, especially by the end. Not only can you upgrade the rate of fire, damage, and capacity of certain weapons, but you can also find unique upgrades for specific weapons that give them bonus effects, such as the plasma cutter dot effect that I just mentioned. They also remove doors that need to be opened with power nodes, so you're going to have a lot more power nodes for upgrading weapons in general. You can even reset weapon upgrades for the low fee of 5,000 credits to get all of your power nodes back in case you wanted to overtune one of your weapons later. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to use all the weapons in the game, because apparently the game is buggy if you install it on an HDD instead of an SSD. I did end up transferring files over to my SSD halfway through the game, but before then I had apparently triggered a glitch that prevented the Ripper from spawning, so I can't speak to whether or not the Ripper is any better. Honestly, the game is surprisingly buggy on an HDD. In fact, I was softlocked out of progressing the main quest as a result of a level 3 clearance card not spawning. If you want this game, please make sure that you install it on an SSD, or it can give you a fair bit of problems, from key items not spawning, to some enemies spawning right in your face out of nowhere. I guess it's my fault. I saw the warning when I booted up the game for the first time, but I didn't think it would matter that much. Now, I'm no game designer, but I can't say it makes any sense to me how it would matter what you're installing the game on. This is the only game I can think of that works like that. Other than that, the game runs okay. I played it on an RTX 3050, and while the game chugged along here and there, especially in the intro, it was mostly playable. I've seen streamers play this on better rigs than mine, and even they have some frame rate issues, so it might even be an optimization issue as well, though I imagine a patch later down the line can clear that up real soon. For what it's worth, even with reduced graphics, the game still looked amazing. Now to get more into my gripes with the game, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the side quests. They're all pretty lazily done, not even as good as Dead Space 3's side quests. It's barely even a side mission really. Basically you go from wherever you happen to be when you get the side quest, to an area you've already been to, and fight maybe a grand total of 5 enemies on the way over to pick up one item just to listen to some extra dialogue for world building. It's not challenging, there's barely any gameplay to speak of besides walking forward, and the rewards are not enough to justify going through the effort in subsequent playthroughs. I'm the kind of person that usually always tries to do at least most of the side quests in a video game, whenever there are any, and I did the side quests in this game just to see how they are, and I have no urge to do them ever again. The only halfway decent reward is the Master Clearance card, and even then, you get it so late in the game that most of the areas that have Master Security crates, or Master Doors in them, are areas you'd have no need to go to for the sake of the main quest. The game makes figuring out where the Master Crates are a huge pain in the ass too. All the devs had to do was simply have some kind of visual marker on the tram station to tell you which areas were 100%ed, and let you lay down custom waypoints, but instead, you are expected to individually check each floor of every area in the game you can backtrack to. And unless you remember the layout really well, you have to constantly check your map as you backtrack just for the bonus lockers and chests, memorize where the staircases are, and whether they take you up or down a floor, and fuck that noise. Most of it is just slightly more ammo, slightly more power nodes, and slightly more money. Not worth it in my opinion, as you will get plenty of resources to work with just on the main quest alone. I mean, for going out of its way to be less linear than the original, it really didn't benefit all that much from it in the end. Difficulty-wise, now maybe this just comes down to the fact that I played a lot of Dead Space in my time, but I thought the game was pretty easy. I really didn't die all that much. I really feel like the game would benefit from an extra difficulty mode right after hard mode, but the only other thing is impossible mode. And that's the same thing as hard, but you can only save one time in your playthrough. Why do game designers feel the need to do this? If I wanted to force myself to play the game with restricted saves, guess what? I would just fucking do it myself, and I don't need a dedicated mode to force me to lose several hours of progress for me. The Dead Space from 2008 had an impossible mode, and from what I remember, it basically just made enemies stronger than hard. It didn't implement any stupid gimmicks like restricting saves, so why not have the remake do the same thing? Now, as far as the storyline is concerned, a lot of it is the same, however I have to comment on what they did to some of the characters. I can tolerate most of the character changes, but first of all, I hate Kyne's new voice actor. I know that overall, Kyne didn't get a lot of screen time in Dead Space 1, but I found his performance a lot more believable and memorable. I really buy that he's a manic doctor who's been through some shit, just barely maintaining his sanity. He had a great voice, but here in the remake, I just find the new actor's delivery just really boring and generic. Kyne had one of the more unique voices before, but now, his voice just blends in with any other random male character. I also don't like how much younger Captain Matthias sounds, and for Hammond's character just... Oh me oh my, Hammond, what the fuck did they do to you? You know, I could get over the fact that they randomly made him younger for no apparent reason, but you think they could have maybe had the actor do some acting? He sounds so fucking deadpan. Every single line of dialogue that comes out of his mouth sounds like he isn't taking the situation seriously at all. With the old voice actor, you could tell that he was getting stressed out and trying to keep his composure and be the responsible team leader. He would get pissed off when people gave him shit. He didn't fuck around. His voice just had this authority to it that the new voice completely lacks. Don't even get me started on how they kill him in the remake. Oh, Jesus Christ. You know what one of my most hated cliches in horror is? Is when you have a mechanic in your story where people, for whatever reason, can experience hallucinations, and they always take the hallucination at face value without questioning the logic of it at all. It's just bad, lazy writing. I don't even care whether or not Hammond is aware that the marker can make you hallucinate. The way he dies is just fucking stupid. Why does he get baited by a hallucination of Shen? He says earlier in the game that he saw Shen die, and then he gets attacked by a transformed Shen, locks him in an escape pod, and boots him out of the ship. And then, when he's on board the military ship that he should know picked up the exact same escape pod, he gets tricked by the marker into thinking Shen is all well and dandy and just wants to hang out, when in fact he's a fucking necromorph that is about to stab him to death. It's insulting to his character, and it makes him look incompetent. If that's what you were gonna do, you should have just had him die to the same brute, the same way as before. I mean, at least that would make sense. There's nothing illogical about a character getting cornered by a monster and killed as a result. For everyone else, I didn't really have any big problems. While I think I still prefer the old Dr. Mercer, I think he was just fine here. Granted, I find his final scene a little strange. Like, he kinda gets enraged at what I guess is supposed to be the hive mind for killing him as it grabs the marker and pulls it away. But isn't that what he wants anyway? Like, he's glorifying death the entire game and talking about how awesome it's going to be a necromorph, but he acts as if it's some great betrayal for him to get grabbed by the tentacle. Compare that to how he died in the old game, where he gladly embraced being killed by an infector. And at this point, he's already fulfilled his purpose anyways, so I really don't know why he's so offended by the hive mind there. For Kendra, she's a lot better here than before. She's not just whining and bitching the entire time, she has one of the better voice actors overall. She tends to be a lot more reserved in this version. Although there are a few moments where you can see her getting pissed off in that familiar, old-school Kendra way. I think the new voice actress for her pulls off the secret double agent thing a lot better. For Isaac, well, I think he was okay. I appreciate the fact that even though they have him talking in the game, they only have him talking when it makes sense. He's not doing the stupid player character thing of reacting to every little thing that happens. They also try to more actively elaborate on his backstory and add some complexity to him and Nicole's relationship. I mean, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, their part is a small bit of the game that doesn't get as much attention as everything else, and it's not really that deep, but it's still an improvement from what we had before, and I can appreciate the small effort to improve this part of the game. There is one complaint about the main story that I want to bring up, though, and granted, this applies to the original as well, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. It's never really explained why the marker wants to be returned to Aegis 7. It's mentioned that there's a difference between what the marker wants and what the hive mind wants. The marker can resist the will of the hive mind, but I thought the wills of the two of them were one and the same. Isn't the entire purpose of the markers in general to create necromorphs to eventually accumulate enough biomass to form a brethren moon? Why would the red marker want to actively oppose that when up until then it's been doing everything to accomplish that goal? Wasn't the black marker's goal to trick humans into thinking it's a source of infinite energy so that they can create more markers to form more brethren moons? So it shouldn't even matter if the red marker is man-made, because it's still working for that purpose. In fact, isn't the source of the marker signal actually the brethren moons too? I mean, the marker had to be giving out a signal before the hive mind was formed. I assume the initial outbreak from the red marker is how the hive mind came into being in the first place, so why would it matter what the hive mind wants? The marker should always be getting signals from the brethren moons to try to create as many necromorphs as possible. So this is an aspect of Dead Space 1's plot that never made any sense to me. Now I can forgive the original on this because it has the benefit of being a first outing, and likely, the reason why there is such inconsistency in the mechanics of the marker's intentions is because the developers had a different idea of what the marker was and what its ultimate goal was, and what the mechanics of the signal was. The remake doesn't have that excuse because it's supposed to be a better connecting tissue to the rest of the trilogy. It's disappointing that one of the most confusing aspects of Dead Space 1 was never addressed here. If anyone in the comments has any idea or explanation of how any of this works, I'd love to see it. One other thing that bothered me is how you actually meet a normal living person in the main quest, Elizabeth Cross. Now, part of what made the atmosphere in Dead Space 1 effective is how isolating and depressing the whole thing felt. Everyone was either dead, turned into a necromorph, and the few living humans on the ship were insane, or they would only live long enough just to get killed by a necromorph right in front of you anyways. I think having a normal person survive to talk to Isaac was a mistake and undermines this. Cross isn't a very interesting character anyways. There's nothing she does in the remake that couldn't have been accomplished by audio diaries, and I don't think her presence really helps the twist at the end when you realize the marker was making you hallucinate Nicole too. Now, as far as specific changes to certain parts of the gameplay goes, I'm pretty neutral on a lot of it, although I do have some negative opinions about how they mixed up some moments. For example, I think the asteroid defense segment in Dead Space 1 was better. It felt more frantic, more desperate. I know a lot of people love to crap on it for being too hard, and yeah, it doesn't control great on console, but it's really not that bad when you get used to it. I think it works better for a dramatic moment in the story as well. The first time I did the asteroid section in this game, I was so confused for the first 60 seconds. I assumed they would have had their own turret sequence too, but it turned out you're supposed to go to individual turrets and manually aim them at a couple asteroids as they fall to give them auto-targeting data or some shit. I mean, I fucked about so much before I realized what I was supposed to do, and even then I was only down to 50% hull integrity by the time I finished fixing all the turrets. I also preferred how before, you had to run behind cover to avoid the asteroids crashing down on you on your way to the turret cockpit. On the topic of bosses and mini-bosses, I think the Brute is much better than it was in the older games. It feels more threatening, but it still feels fair to fight. Its attacks have stronger tracking, and its charge follows you more accurately. One interesting change is it can spit projectiles at you before you blow off any of its limbs, instead of only doing so after it loses one of its limbs. I feel like there are some cases where they didn't do enough to make the bosses different, though. The first Leviathan fight didn't do much to make the fight harder or more unique, aside from putting the player on a timer in the second phase with no infinite oxygen tanks around the arena. But for the second fight where you had to blow it off the radar dish, I actually really liked it because it was a refreshing new experience from what would usually be the second turret sequence of the game. As far as the final boss goes, I have some complaints. Now, in both versions of Dead Space, the Hive Mind boss is a spectacle. It's a giant tentacle monster, and it feels really cool to fight. However, mechanically it is one of the easiest fights in the entire game. In both versions of the game, you can casually avoid its attacks by just slowly walking to the side as its tentacle comes down. It cannot keep up with your movements at all. Even though everywhere else in the game, enemies will lead their shots. There's no timing, there's no skill component to beating this boss. It is utterly brain dead, and they barely mix up the fight here. Even when they try to make moving around the arena harder by having the boss spit acid on the ground to zone the player off, or puke explosive growths around the player, it doesn't matter because you really don't even need that much space to avoid the tentacle attacks. Even when the generic necromorphs start attacking you in the middle of the fight, the Hive Mind will patiently and very politely wait for the player to finish killing its minions before it starts attacking again. I'd like to reiterate that this was on hard mode. I see a lot of people praise the new gravity system, but I honestly feel like it's ironically more restrictive than when you had to jump in 0G. I think what hurts it for me is that you can't go up or down easily. You can only go left, right, forwards, and backwards, which can make dodging a bit awkward, as you have to make sure you have enough space to go left or right to avoid attacks. It's not a terrible system, but I do think it's overrated, and like I said before, I know I'm in the minority here, but I always liked the gravity mechanics in the first Dead Space way more than how they handled it in the later games. I wouldn't have minded if they tried combining both mechanics either, like letting you fly freely and jump around, but here we are. I'm not a fan of how they rebalance some of the enemies. Twitchers all have a stasis pack inside of their chest that you can blow up to slow them down, which I think trivializes them way too much. I mean, you already have your own stasis, and some of the arenas have stasis barrels, so it just seems like overkill, and swarmers don't do as much DPS in the remake, which makes them, and consequently pregnants, a lot less intimidating. There are a few design choices that I think are just stupid too. Like, why does it make the same sound effect when you pick up a healing item as when you're using a healing item? It's just confusing for no reason. It's strange too that you can't always use a shop or save your game during a call, when as far as I remember you could do that before. There are some really cool new design bits though. For instance, sometimes the game lets you choose how to handicap yourself through power panels, where you can choose what functions to leave powered up in areas. In one instance, you can choose between leaving the lights on but not giving yourself oxygen, or leaving the oxygen on but having to rely on your flashlight more. Unfortunately, there are a few mechanical issues as well. For example, sometimes grabbing items with kinesis won't always work. There will be times when you will try to grab dropped loot from range, and you will pick up the most useless things, constantly, even if your cursor is right on the mark. This can happen during fights when you try to grab enemy blades too, and this can screw you over. I'm not a fan of how when you use explosive barrels, now instead of going where your cursor is, they auto-track on enemies, and it can glitch out and miss completely as a result, particularly on slope geometry. Anyways, I think that covers my thoughts on the Dead Space remake. In conclusion, I do have some problems with it, but I'd still say it's a damn fine game. At least personally for me, I really don't think it's ever going to outright replace the 2008 version, because that version has such a special place in my heart, and like I said, I do think it does certain parts better, but I will definitely give this one a few more playthroughs here and there. I'm curious what y'all have to say about the remake too, and for now, this is going to be Bootie signing off, so peace guys.